And that's what's difficult for a lot of people to swallow. How can Samson and the things that he did and this story be such a beautiful picture of the gospel, and how can he be a foreshadow or a type of Christ and yet also a major heel?
Yeah.
And how is that possible? David, how can he be such an image of, my kingdom will know no end, and yet he's a murderer and a womanizer, at the same time. And so, it's important for us to remember that, God speaking through you is not his stamp of approval on your life. God using you is not his, if God uses you, it doesn't mean everything you do is perfect. It just means that God's really good at what he does, and he can even use me. He can even use someone like Samson. Remember, and this was something I learned, in Bible school, my Old Testament professor, when we got to the book of Judges, he said, you have to look at the book of Judges like a bucket with a hole in the bottom. That at the beginning of the book of Judges, Joshua, which leads into Judges, Joshua was that you're never going to meet a man as righteous and as obedient and powerful as Joshua. Always did the right thing. And yet at the end, the best that God can find, the cream of the crop is someone like Samson. And they do. They go down and down and down. Gideon, such great faith. Hiding in a hole, whining, his kids end up killing each other. I mean, it's just nasty stuff. But it's like the, victorious, epic leader, deliverer of Israel, daytime TV. It just goes south really quickly. But so let's get into chapter 15. I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll look at it. After some days, at the time of the wheat harvest, so we've got harvest, and Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. So he's going back to where? To get his bride, right? With a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber, but she's not been faithful, right? She's been given to another.
Yeah.
But he still considers her his wife. Yeah. But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Listen, my bad. I thought you were mad because she told your riddle, and when you left, you were not talking. So I thought it was over, and I gave her to someone else. Yeah, which would have been the father's legal right, in that moment. It's just, again, this was more of a merger, financial thing. Listen, I thought she was on her own and destitute, and you were done, and so she had to get married. So I gave her to this guy, and he was willing. And so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Here, I got another. And she's better looking. She's a better looking heifer. This is the Bible, everyone. Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. So Samson went and he caught 300 foxes. Now, again, this is so fantastical, right? One part is, how on earth do you find 300 foxes? Because I know that you can be in in 100-acre woods and there might be 5, and they're all related, But here he gathers somehow 300 foxes. And took torches, and how did you, even the logical outworking of this process. He has to take 300 of them and tie torches to them, tail to tail. Okay, in other words, he ties the foxes together, so he has 150 torches tied to the tails of the fox. And then he sends them out into the standing grain there in verse 5. What I want to know is, after the 150th pair of foxes, wouldn't you think that the first pair of foxes already would have burned up before you had a chance
And they're
to
standing?
set them off?
Yeah, they're
Right.
standing.
You know, and so what you see here, you know, I mean, just, and I don't think the God intends us to just check our brains at the door. He intends us to look at this and say, you know, one of a couple different things. You know, and you could take your pick. You know, this is either a miracle, okay, which that's perfectly within the realm of God's ability to do.
Right.
That he had slow burning torches and the foxes, you know, were patient and waited. And if he can gather animals to go into an ark, I guess suppose he can send 300 foxes to meet up with Samson. So you can take it that way, or you can look and say, is there a deeper meaning behind this little story about the 300 foxes and the torches? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know. Okay, aren't you? You were hoping, yeah. What do you
Here's
got?
Mine says.
Yeah.
It is possible that the animals were not foxes, but jackals, which were more common in Palestine. The two animals
Okay.
look similar, and the same Hebrew word, shual.
Probably wild dog
used
of
for both.
sorts.
Whereas foxes are solitary, jackals travel in packs, and thus 300 of them could be caught more easily. Both animals have long tails
So
that
it makes
could
it
be tied together.
it makes it slightly more plausible, but only slightly.
Still 300.
In either way, it's still a miracle, right?
I mean-
You've got, if it's jackals and they're tied to you know, and he's got the pairs and they just let him do this,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
But what we do see
Yeah,
here
hold on.
is you know, Jesus even describes himself in the Gospels. I've come with a winnowing fork at hand to the threshing floor, and he is this guy who means business, and that's when Jesus describes himself as the one who comes with a winnowing fork in hand. This is not what we see as that merciful judge. This is the harsh judge. This is the justice dispensing guy. With a winnowing fork. And what we see in this instance is the justice dispensing Samson. And he even says, I'm going to be innocent of what I do to you. It's your fault, what I do to you. Okay? And the fact that he uses wild dogs or foxes, either one, with torches to tear up what does he burn? He doesn't burn just random stuff. He burns their harvest. He ruins and to burn someone's harvest, you've put them in jeopardy for the rest of the year, right? You've just collapsed their economy. Is essentially what he does here in this moment. He burns their grain and their olive orchards. And then, of course, the Philistines get mad in verse 6. Who wouldn't? And they said, who's done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So whose fault is it? It's his wife's dad, according to the Philistines. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Wow. Okay. And Samson said to them, if this is what you do, if this is who you are as a people, okay, then I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Edom. That's just an interesting phrase. He struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. Does anybody have a different version that says something else? He struck them hip and thigh with a great blow.
He attacked them.
Yeah, he beat them up. And but where else do we see hips and thighs injured in Scripture? Anybody remember?
Who's the one that caused him to walk?
Yeah, it's Jacob,
Limp.
right? Jacob walked with a limp because God dislocated his hip.
Yeah.
And so it speaks of crippling and hobbling someone. So what Samson did here is he crippled them. He didn't just cripple their economy, he crippled them physically. So now, even if you could replant, good luck, because now you can't even walk.
He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them.
Yeah, it would not have been
Then
good.
went down and stayed in a cave in a rock of Etham.
He went to the cleft of the rock.
I read one time when I was reading about Jacob that was crippled. It was it was in a book. He says God would rather see you with a temporary limp than a perpetual strut.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, he humbles the proud. All right, verse 9. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they said, "We have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so have I done to them." And they said to him, "We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves." They said to him, "No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands," which really, it's like, "No, I'm not going to beat you up. I'm just going to deliver you to the people who are." Okay. But he's like, I don't want to have to kill you, so can you just tie me up and take me there? I think is what Samson's saying, as they did to me. So we've come down to bind you. And Samson said, "Swear that you won't attack me yourselves." And they said, "No, we'll just bind you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Do you find it interesting that every time Samson does something in the power of the Spirit, it's not this subtle kind of moving from God? The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. So it's a very quick and violent thing when the Spirit comes upon Samson. And it's almost like he's not in control in these moments. But the ropes that were on his arm became as flax that had caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. So whether that's just imagery, of how easily they broke, with Samson's strength, or is that something supernatural happened to the ropes where they just fell off? I don't know. Either way, it was the power of God that did it. And then he found the fresh jawbone of a donkey and put out his hand and took it. And with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men." So Samson's quite the poet. He loves his little songs and his riddles, right? With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps and heaps, I piled them up. And with the jawbone of a donkey, I've struck down 1,000 men. And as soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand. And that place was called Ramath Lehi, which means hill of the jawbone. Dun, dun, dun. And he was very thirsty. And he called upon the Lord and said, "You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And God split open a hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. So we see the pretty neat image of, we see the God providing water from the rock for Israel in the desert. Same thing happens here for Samson. That rock being Christ, and that water that comes out to feed. And his spirit returned, and he revived. He was given that life again because he was so thirsty. Therefore, the name of it was called En Kakor, which means the spring of the one who called, which would have been really an interesting piece to add to Andy Chandler's message on Sunday, all about God answering prayer. When you call, he answers. It is at Lehi to this day. So apparently when they wrote this story about Samson, that spring was still issuing water, and you could go and see it. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. 20 years. Now, I won't push us on into chapter 16. We only got about 10 minutes left, I think. And if we start chapter 16, we'll just get frustrated because that's the best part of the story.
Delilah.
Yeah. Yeah, because his first wife died. So he had to go get another gal. But, this is probably one of the more famous stories from the Bible, not let alone the book of Judges, but even from the Bible. Just the story of how she tries to woo him into giving up the secret of his strength. And so we'll break that down a little bit. Why is it that these are the things, the long hair? It wasn't the touching of dead animals, because he did that and didn't lose his strength. And so it must have been something else. And he lies to her a couple times, but ultimately she does figure out it's the hair. So what is it about the hair? And there must be, again, the weirder the story, the more likely you're about to see Jesus. So we'll figure that out. Okay? Questions, thoughts, comments?
Can you see how, reading this, if you weren't a Christian, if you weren't a believer?
You'd say the people of God are cray-cray. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
Well, I remember thinking about.
yeah, easy.
When they talked about Samson's strength, I thought it was so ridiculous that it was the hair. I always thought it was the Lord. That was his strength. He couldn't do any of that
Without God.
without the Lord. That's
Right.
what was kind of
Yeah, and obviously it had to
about
have,
this hair
it had to have been the
up
Lord, but why the hair? Why is that tied to God giving him the
Yeah.
strength?
Yeah.
And so we'll look at that, because he was not supposed to cut it, but he did. Well, he didn't, they did. And so to take away someone's hair, what is it about taking away someone's hair? All right, so I think we'll be surprised at the answer, maybe even
Outward
pleased.
sign.
well, the lion and the bees. That's pretty crazy right there.
Yeah, yeah.